Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. Well, it's been a busy week with the meat industry coming under increasing scrutiny in relation to COVID-19 outbreaks. But it's also been a busy week in terms of the future of farming. The EU has presented its Farm to Fork strategy for agriculture that will be the blueprint for Irish farmers for the remainder of this decade and beyond. I spoke to Minister for Agriculture Michael Creed about how the plan might impact Irish farmers and what the national plan for farmers here is likely to look like.
So you're saying that if there is a push for biodiversity, that, you'd welcome a push for biodiversity, but if that means a drop in production, that farmers do need to be recompensed accordingly for that?
I think whether it is biodiversity, whether it is water quality, there clearly is, or across a range of other issues, there clearly is a cost to all of these things. And you can't keep asking farmers to do all of this without acknowledging that and supporting them financially for it.
You talked a lot about our ambition for our future plans, and we have a lot more autonomy this time around in developing our future plan. But at what stage is Ireland's national plan at?
Well, we've published the whole of government climate action plan. We're very advanced in terms of the granular detail that will be required in our own roadmap in the agricultural sector now, which is informed by I hate the term, but the target MAC curve, which talks about kind of, the actions that would be necessary at an individual farm level. And we're working out now, subsequent to the public consultation, kind of the detailed issues in respect to that. And we're well advanced in that.
Do we get a flavour for any of those individual actions that might be at farm level?
Well, I mean, look, it is, in my view, highly likely that nutrient management plans will be a cornerstone of this. They're not new. But I mean, like any analysis would show that chemical fertilizer is a significant input and cost, but that we're operating in a situation where we're far from, maximizing kind of soil pH, which informs the requirement for the level of chemical fertilizer or organic fertilizer. A very simple thing like nutrient management plans, application of lime, thereby in many instances minimizing the requirement for chemical fertilizers, will be, I think, critical part of any future roadmap. And
would that be, the application of lime, I know previously, I think under REPS, it was funded. Could that be funded as part of it? Well,
I'm aware that there's always a yearning among farmers that I talk to for a lime subsidy. The contrary argument is that it's such a sensible thing for farmers to be doing and cost-efficient thing for farmers to be doing that, we could usefully spend very scarce resources. And I make that point in the context of the endless demands for public support now in terms of COVID-19. We could use whatever scarce resources we have, I think, better than supporting something that already makes abundantly clear economic sense to farmers to be maximising their soil fertility themselves.
And last question, given that it is National Bee Day, can you let us know if is going to be more bee boxes in the next plan or anything for pollinators?
Well, I don't know if you're aware, but we have a beehive on the rooftop of the Department of Agriculture.
I am aware. I'm waiting for my jar of honey. That's what I'm waiting for.
Well, I'll tell you what. We'll try and get you that because I have myself seen it. It's fantastic. And look, I think one of the upsides, if I might use that, of the pandemic which we're going through is I think people, by virtue of the silence in the countryside, have become more attuned to nature around them. And, whether it is birdsong or bees or butterflies, I think the wonder of nature has been, I suppose, recognised by many people. It's probably always recognised by farmers. But biodiversity is a keystone of our approach. You'll be aware of kind of initiatives that we have in terms of things like, the Burn project, the Harrier project, the freshwater pearl mussel. So it's an area where we're very active already, and I think bees are very often a good indicator of the relative health or otherwise of the environment that we live and operate in. So I don't want to kind of, say that that's an indication of what policy will contain, but it's something I'm very positively disposed to.
Minister Creed there. Well, of course, there was lots of talk in Brussels and also in the virtual Farmers Journal office about all of this. And I checked in with our market specialist, Phelim O'Neill, to get the full picture.
Phelim O'Neill. Phelim, you're very welcome back to the show. Thanks for being on. We have some news this week. Farm to Fork, it's finally happening. But for people out there, what is it and why is it so important to farmers?
Yes, the Farm to Fork strategy will basically shape farming in the European Union over much of this decade. It's aligned with the Common Agriculture Policy that's due to run from 2021 to 2027. And the big highlight articles in it, I suppose, are the fact that it has ambitions to reduce the use of pesticides by 50%, to reduce fertilizer usage by 50%. It wants to grow organic production in the European Union from the current average of about 8% to 25%. And it has a wider ambition then in terms of shaping the diets of EU citizens to move away from meat to more plant-based diet as part of the whole drive for sustainability, as part of the wider European Green Deal, if you like, that has the ambition of making the European Union the world's first carbon neutral continent by 2050.
What does this mean, say for the farmer out there who might be listening in their tractor at the minute? Say for the tillage farmer, should they be shivering in their fent with fear over this idea of cutting pesticides?
That's something that our colleague Andy Doyle goes into in some detail in this week's Farmers Journal. And the short answer is yes. Any ambition to remove half of the pesticide usage that we have at present in Irish agriculture or European agriculture has to be a concern, particularly when so many other areas of the world in farming and agriculture actually look to increase the use of technology to achieve higher yields, to reduce costs. We have the example of pesticides, fertilizer in the tillage world. We have the issue of hormones and treating cattle with hormones in beef production. Now, that's long since been banned by the European Union. It is an element of the strategy that the European Union, in wanting to lead this crusade, if you like, towards more sustainable and greener agriculture production, that they will bring the rest of the world with them. Now, that's a very worthy and noble ambition. The only tool really that the European Union has to make that happen is the use of trade deals. Now, they did negotiate a trade deal last year with Mercosur in which there was a chapter on climate. It did put in fairly serious targets for Brazil to replant the areas of the Amazon rainforest that have been cleared over the past decade. It has an ambition that they would be replanting to the tune of about 1 million hectares a year for the next decade. Now, so far, and we're a year down the road on that, there's little evidence of any replanting. In fact, it has been the opposite. Clearance has continued. So it's how it affects the farmer, I suppose, is cutting his silage at the moment in an Irish field. Basically, there is a risk that this could mean that his standards of production or the bar for him would get higher. But there are some positives as well.
But Phelim, I suppose, just for the sake of our argument there, I'm sorry for interrupting, but we always go on and hark on about kind of our green credentials already in Ireland, especially on the international platform. You know, we're always talking about how we sell things, and I know Origin Green, Board B as Origin Green, has come in for some stick recently, but at the same time we're always pushing the fact that, you know, we're the fifth best beef producer in terms of carbon. We're the lowest carbon footprint in terms of dairy. So is this not in a way good news for Irish farmers? Can they
There is, and that's in terms of unit of production rather than absolute standards. But I suppose the positive news is Irish handling, for example, of live cattle exports, we would be seen as the European standard, the people that set the standard there. But in terms of, if we're looking for some positives in it, the drive for, there is for the first time in an major EU report, the recognition of the need to acknowledge the role of agriculture, sequestration in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. That's where the growing of not your pasture, not your grassland, it actually offsets some of the carbon emissions from the cattle that harvest it and that eat it. So for the first time, that's recognised. And there is also a recognition that payment for farmers, not just within the cap, but perhaps beyond it, will come, and that there can be this, perhaps the potential, and we covered this in the past in the Farmers Journal, of a carbon payment. And I think there's some exciting possibilities in there. There's the ambition that the EU will set global standards and bring others up to that level. And I think that's the role now for our farm organisations in the negotiation of the detail of this, because this is just an outline plan. But the negotiation of the detail now has to focus on making sure that everything that is imported into the European Union is produced to no less a standard than is required of European farmers, and that payments for environmental measures, if you like, that we attract not just within the common agriculture, but from the wider European funding pot as well, so that farmers can be rewarded for making a real and meaningful impact on climate change and environmental controls.
That could be some good news there. I suppose, I know the dealer had raised concerns before. I'm wondering if those concerns have spread out a little bit wider. Are we surprised that this farm to fork strategy seems to be being driven not by the agriculture side of things in the Commission, but by the health side of things, by Stella Kirkajals, if I can pronounce it properly, as opposed to Janusz Wojciechowski?
Yes, I'll not challenge your pronunciation there, Hannah, in any way. But
someone not listening.
I would share a surprise that this is coming forward from the Health Commissioner. It has been well flagged for ever since the new Commission came into office back in December that it would be the Health Commissioner that would take charge of this farm to fork strategy. You would have thought it's the most obvious thing on earth that it would be part of an Agriculture Commissioner's brief, but it's not. And this is reflected very much in that you could say almost half the words in the 9,000 odd words in the document are focused on diet, on the consumption, the food consumption pattern of EU citizens, and the strong desire to discourage the consumption of meat, removing all of the promotion monies from that end, and to encourage the move towards a plant-based and meat replacement type diet, for which there will be considerable research funds made available as well.
Phelim O'Neill there. Well, you might be aware there is a new CEO of AgriAware, Marcus O'Halloran. Our property editor Odile Evans got chatting to him this week about connecting with consumers.
So I'm joined by Marcus, and I guess, Marcus, the big question is, what are the main challenges in engaging the public, in the message about Irish food in a post-coronavirus world?
Hi Odile, thanks very much for having us again. I think that in a post-COVID-19 world, there will certainly be challenges in engaging consumers in Irish food. I think financial capability of the consumer will become very apparent and relevant. A lot of the country have lost their jobs, their mortgages are on hold, and there's a real threat to their future incomes as we look towards another recession. So it's important that we understand that in this whole situation, and that we as an industry are innovative in ensuring that those on lesser incomes can still buy a large proportion of their shop as Irish food, rather than cheaper alternatives.
Yeah, and do you think going forward it's going to be easier to connect with consumers now that everyone is more aware of the food supply chain, or will it be harder because AgriAware relies on a lot of face-to-face initiatives such as the open farms on the Maybank holiday, or the mobile farm and the farm at the zoo? So will it get any easier to connect with consumers, or is it going to be more difficult?
I think, Odile, yes and no is the answer here. We live in a world where online communication has a strong impact on the consumer, so the industry as a whole needs strong messaging to ensure our consumers are influenced in fact and figure on the industry. We are very economically and environmentally sustainable, so we need to keep delivering that message. It's obviously different, as you mentioned, that we rely on face to face for a lot of our communication. Like Open Farm last year would have had 10,000 interactions that day. We would have 3,500 from a farm walk and talk, but that's something that we recognise from the off, and that's why we've been focusing a lot on our online content, and that's something that we will continue to do. A lot of our campaigns going forward will be focused on reaching that person who doesn't step outside of their surroundings or their environment or their comfort zone to actually come and educate themselves. We want to try as best as possible to bring that to them, and it's campaigns like that will circle around that we will be working on.
Okay, so there are your campaigns for the short term, but I guess you're now in the job a couple of weeks, you got your feet under the desk. So what would you like to achieve during your time as CEO of AgriAware?
I'd like the public to really get down to the nuts and bolts with the conversation of Irish food sustainability. I think it's a conversation we need to bring to the public, and we need to stop being reactive towards the whole conversation. And that's industry-wide. We constantly seem to be defending agriculture. Well, we need to be promoting it a bit better. I'd obviously like to increase our reach on our following programs and our following on online activity and the message delivery overall. Lastly, I suppose I'd like to get AgriAware to become that unique independent body that all of the industry can feed in and feed out of through one independent voice that would speak for Irish agriculture. We have our Ag Credible ambassadors, we have our different programs, and I'd like for the entire industry to want to be involved in that and to, I suppose, to enhance those programs to a level that the whole industry is proud of and that they're all proud to be a part of, and that's pretty much where I'd like to take the thing.
Thanks a million, Marcus, for joining us on this week's podcast. Check out the full interview in this week's Irish Country Living.
Odile Evans, and we'll be back just after this.
Cash for carbon. In this week's Irish Farmers Journal, the EU unveils its landmark farm to fork strategy, which reveals farmers should be paid for the carbon they capture in hedgerows, trees and soils, plans to stop payments to armchair farmers, drastic cuts proposed for pesticides and fertiliser use. Plus, don't miss your free 56-page agribusiness report with KPMG, showing the sustainability work already being carried out by farmers.
Inside this week's Irish Farmers Journal, on sale today.
Now, as mentioned in the intro, the meat industry has been under scrutiny, and 3 ministers are set to appear before a special sitting of the Business Committee on Thursday. While Meat Industry Ireland has said that updated HSE protocol is being overseen by Department of Agriculture staff, this has been cast into doubt by Minister for Agriculture Michael Creed. When I spoke to him earlier this week, he outlined what the role of department staff is in meat plants.
The only function that we have, legal function that we have in meat plants, is around food safety, around animal health and welfare, etc. We don't have a statutory role in respect of health and welfare of workers, but obviously, the health and welfare as a department of our own staff is of concern, but also the broader industry. And, from the feedback we've been getting from our own staff, broadly speaking, it has been a calm environment and communication of what's happening in each of those plants. And as I said, broadly speaking, it hasn't been brought to my attention by our own senior department officials that there is any widespread concern about unwillingness or unpreparedness of management to respond appropriately to the COVID crisis. And that's as I would expect, because we've had engagement very early on with the management and with the ownership of these plants very early on, and continued engagement with Meat Industry Ireland during the pandemic. And at every occasion that has been the message that has been communicated to us of an industry that's responding continuously to kind of updated information and best practice.
You kind of mentioned there about the veterinary staff, and it is a large cohort, I suppose, of VIs and also TVIs, temporary veterinary inspectors as well. Have you had any direct concerns or complaints from those staff to the department who are working in the factories about COVID-19?
No, I haven't, and nor am I aware of any coming in directly to the department itself. There's obviously communication almost on a daily basis between senior management in the department and the staff, but I'm not aware of any concerns as you've asked about. No.
Because we did have Veterinary Ireland saying that they had asked the department for more PPE, and we did have a response from the department saying that they were in the process of sourcing additional PPE from, I think, the Office of Public Procurement, I think it was.
Yeah, the question of PPE is a difficult one. It's not easy to source this material, but obviously we have been proactive in terms of securing PPE for our own staff.
Yeah. Would that not have been a concern, though, raised by kind of department staff and factories that they wanted additional PPE?
Well, I'm not sure whether it came from a request from our own staff or whether it was a response by our own senior management, but the issue is in hand anyway. Okay.
In terms then, I know you're sitting down with two of your ministerial colleagues tomorrow to face questions about this meat industry and the outbreak as well. But I guess longer term then, if you compare, say, the dairy industry and the meat industry and the number of cases, and we understand there were very few cases in the dairy industry compared to the meat industry, I mean, we're talking about opening up the country again and life post COVID-19. Is there a conversation to be had there about kind of the care of workers in different processing industries?
Well, I mean, obviously the government have published guidelines and protocols for the reopening, and it's incumbent on all industries that are reopening to be aware of those. As you are aware, some sectors of the economy didn't close at all, the agricultural sector being one, because of the essential nature of the work they do and keeping food supply chains and supermarket shelves stacked, etc. So, you know,
is it not stark? Is it not going to raise some questions looking back on this, that the dairy industry seems to have managed to get through relatively unscathed, and yet the meat industry is in the spotlight now at the minute?
Well, I think in many respects you're not comparing like with like. I think anybody who is familiar with a modern dairy processing facility and a modern meat processing facility, they are very, very different. There is a high level of automation and a low density of population in dairy processing plants. It's very, very different in meat processing plants. But I think what's incumbent on everybody is they take every step possible to mitigate risk. And I think that's been happening in the dairy side. It's been happening in the meat side. It's unfortunate that we've had, but it's a global phenomenon, you know, issues around meat processing, because they are, the nature of the employment is, you know, high volumes of staff in under one roof, where that's not the case, where there's a high level of automation in the dairy industry.
And we have more on that story in the paper. Well, Deputy Editor Amy Ford has written the second part of a feature on designated land for the paper this week, which is well worth checking out. I caught up with her to find out why the issue is so important to so many farmers.
So if I'm a farmer with designated land, why is that such a big deal?
That's right, Hannah. So there's in the region of 35,000 farmers across the country that are in some sort of land designation. And when we say designation, we mean they either have land that's designated in three kind of different areas. So you have a special area of conservation, a special protected area, and a natural history area. So they are spread across the country, but most of them are along the western seaboard, along hilly areas or kind of commonage and mountain areas land. But there is lowland areas in designations as well. And I suppose,
is this not good news though? Would some people not be saying, sure, they'll just get extra money for having this kind of land?
And those farmers in a designation would say, if only that was the case. So at the minute there is no payment for being in a designation, no direct payment or no scheme, if a designated scheme, if you get me, like a glass scheme or something like that. Okay. There was a certain type of one in the old rep scheme, but at the minute there is not one. So you could be saying, yes, you can say that, yes, it's a good thing to have a designation, but farmers aren't paid for it, for looking after it, or aren't told how to manage it properly or kind of engaged with on it.
Okay, and are you prevented from doing things on it?
Yes, you are. So if you have a designation, there are 39 actions which require consent if you want to carry them out. Not every designation will have the 39 actions. Some designations...
Yeah, 39 sounds like an awful lot. Jeannie.
Yes, and it is. Some might have 2 or 3, some might have up to 20, over 20. It really depends on the designation, what the habitat is, if there's a bird there, and the relevant things. So I suppose to put it, getting down to brass tacks, you need to apply for planning permission and do a natura impact statement, for argument's sake, if you want to put up fencing on certain designations.
And do we have any kind of specific cases, farmer cases highlighted?
Yeah, we do. So in this week's Farmers Journal, we have another 2-page spread on designations, and I speak to 3 farmers there who are impacted by designations. One of which spent €4,000 between planning costs and environmental impact statements, and then did not get the planning permission to put up the fence in the end. So he spent €4,000 and didn't get a post in the ground for fencing at all. And I suppose some farmers do get permission to do it. It all depends on the designation, but in this case he didn't.
Right, okay. So yeah, definitely a big story and definitely one to follow as well if you pick up the paper this week, or your e-paper. Of course, you don't have to go to the local shop if you don't want to. Amy Ford, thank you very much. Thank you for coming on.
And there's much more on that story in this week's Farmers Journal. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for tuning in. And remember, you can catch up with all the news online or through our Farm Tech Talks that are out every Friday. I'm Hannah Quinn-Mulligan and the sound engineer is Ferdia Mooney.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes and Spotify every Wednesday.